Sister Jean Elisabetta turned the parchment over in gloved fingers, her eyes flicking between the flowing script of handwritten notes and the jittering data feed streaming across the embedded slate. Behind the triple-sealed window, 5 cogitator-linked servitors clicked and hissed in slow procession, their labored breath punctuated by occasional bursts of binaric static. The lumens overhead cast a faint amber pall, barely enough to ward off the gloom. The familiar hum of air recyclers was absent, cut off by deliberate order. A precaution. Nothing airborne was to be risked. The silence had weight. The stillness made the air stale and heavy, clinging to her like a damp burial shroud. One boot rested lightly on the table's edge, the other braced against the deck. Elisabetta's stance was casual, but her mind far from it. She tapped her gold-inlaid bolt gun absently, her fingers trailing over its scarred grip and the worn aquila stamped into its spine. Cold, familiar, reassuring. The data did not make sense. The wound stitcher's findings, combined with the scanned samples taken from aboard the Diligent Herald, should have painted a picture. They did not. Instead, they offered contradictions. The mutation vectors were erratic, the infection progression unprecedented. Some victims succumbed in minutes, others lingered through every phase of degradation without uniformity. Warp corruption she could understand. She had seen its work before, in the underhives of Carthus, in the spore wars of Palace Reach. But this was something else. Something was missing, and that was unacceptable. Across the chamber, Brother Nathaniel stood motionless near the viewport, a towering silhouette against the gray-white desolation of the moon's surface. Arms folded, he said nothing, but his fingers twitched. Once, twice, a tick perhaps, or a battle-honed instinct that sensed danger even now. Beyond the reinforced glass, Nithelm's pale regolith stretched endlessly into shadows. The half-buried remnants of the old prefabricated colonies cast long, angled shapes in the sun's wan light. Nothing moved, nothing living at least. There was no proper quarantine site on NihtWyrtha, nor did Fiskbala have one. Only Modular Bill, once a minor mining installation and the sole survivor of the original 3 lunar colonies, had endured the Nightayatan incursion. Repurposed in haste, Modular Bill had become something else entirely. Godric, entombed now in iron and fury, had fortified its surface for defense. Osric, ever the stubborn architect of his own legend, had claimed the broken workshops below as his sanctum, self-declared runesmith of the fledgling Void Revenants, taking the name from a long-dead hero of the planet below. Elfstan, Nathaniel's solemn apprentice and the only other apothecary the chapter yet possessed, had transformed the upper modules into a functioning Medicae center. But he had gone further. It was Elfstan who had ordered the quarantine wing be added, and it was here they now stood. The place was clean, too clean. The scent of antiseptic balms hung in the air like incense in a shrine. Through the walls came the low, ceaseless cycling of the air filtration system and the echo of hymnals from servitor choirs, grating, imperfect, but constant, always constant. Nathaniel turned slightly, the servo at his wrist complaining as he flexed it, an old battle wound that even Mechanicus metal could not entirely soothe. He shook his hand absently, then looked up. Above the dust haze of the moon's exosphere, a single, gleaming shape hung in orbit, the Medica Sanctorum. Battlecruiser and cathedral both, the Order's Hospitaler's sanctuary and executioner, bristling with weapons he neither recognized nor wished to. Its hull bore none of the purity seals or honor markings of the Astartes. Its purpose was purer, simpler, cruel. He knew what was stationed aboard, knew too that around the exclusion zone marched patrols from Wirthan's security forces, but it was the Frateris Templars who now held the perimeter, troops not bound to any one world, but to the Order's Hospitaller themselves. He did not like that at all. Nathaniel had never trusted the Order's Hospitaller, never needed them, but he understood them. If containment failed, if the corruption from the Diligent Herald had breached quarantine, they would act. Without hesitation, without ceremony, the Medica Sanctorum would fire. Atomic fire would cleanse a quarter of Nithelm's surface, and the Frateris Templars would burn what the orbital batteries did not. He did not resent them for that. It was the logical solution. He just preferred they wait until after he had left. "You are troubled, Brother Apothecary," Elisabetta said at last, her voice calm but resolute, slicing through the oppressive stillness like a scalpel. Nathaniel did not turn at first. His eyes remained on the quarantine structures below. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, measured. Confused more than anything, he admitted. This malady, it was clearly engineered by a gene right. At least it was, originally, not some spontaneous warp aberration. Elisabetta inclined her head, studying him with careful interest before returning her eyes to the parchment and its unsettling notations. Yes, this affliction. I have seen many plagues, warp-touched fevers, gene-corrupting sicknesses, but this, she turned toward him fully, her expression unreadable, this is something else. She tapped one slim finger against the scroll, tracing a sequence of degradation stages. It acts like a pathogen. It spreads as a normal infection might. But then, she lifted her eyes. It begins to alter the host's psionic field. It opens them, rips them open to the warp. And not just as conduits, Nathaniel frowned, but as gateways, she nodded once. It takes a biological virus and spiritually mutates it, enabling transformation into something akin to a lesser daemon. Worse, she hesitated, then spoke flatly. It gives the host pleasure. It sings to them in ecstasy in the moment of dissolution. All the hallmarks are there. Slaneshi, he said, voice low and bitter. She placed the parchment aside and lifted 2 data scrolls, holding them side by side. Compare these. One is from a random crew member aboard Medica Sanctorum, the other from a medical assistant here on Modular Bill. Nathaniel stepped closer. He didn't need to read the details. The patterns, though faint, were familiar, subtle markers buried in the helix, old scars rewritten by something long dormant. It's not new, Elisabetta said, her voice just above a whisper. It's been here before, in the Reach. Nathaniel looked at her now, searching her face. And that brings us to our real problem? She met his gaze and gave the faintest of nods. There is no record of this plague in the Imperial archives, no entries in the Adeptus Biologists, no quarantines, no crusades. It predates the Administratum. She let the thought hang, poised delicately in the air. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Slanesh was born at the dawn of the Imperium. Silence fell again, deeper than before. Only the steady thrum of filtered air and the distant mechanical hymnals of the servitor choir remained. It was plain to both of them now. From all our tests and retesting, Elisabetta said slowly, this infection was indeed capable of spreading through baseline human populations. But the citizens of NihtWyrtha, they were immune, not just resistant, immune. They possessed dormant antibodies encoded into their immune systems from birth. Nathaniel gave a slow nod, twisting his augmented wrist again without thinking. And the planet had no contact with the Imperium, or with any branch of humanity, for over 20,000 years. He paused, then added grimly, which means they were exposed to this up to 15 millennia before the god of ecstasy and bliss was even thought of. Sister Chirurgeon Elisabetta turned back to the cogitators. Their runes painted shifting green light across her pale irises. She had seen impossible things. She had walked through plague zones and warp-stained hives, but this was different. This could mean, she murmured, that we are dealing with something far older and far darker than our 4 known never-born adversaries. She reached forward and pulled a datasheet from the pile, a report on the Nitaitan outbreak. These other creatures, the ones frozen beneath this facility, Nathaniel gestured to the viewport. No longer, he said curtly. The Nitaitan have been dealt with. Even so, she continued, undeterred, they were some ancient form of warp-born entity, ones who, as you said, developed what you termed an encounter suit, enabling them to exist in real space without summoning rituals or psychic gateways. Nathaniel folded his arms defensively. That was Archmagos Damia Voratrix's theory. I merely agreed with it. Elisabetta looked at him sharply. Daemons exploring real space in encounter suits? She said flatly, that's not an incursion, Brother Apothecary. That's colonization, and it's far more dangerous than anything we've faced before. Nathaniel shrugged, and for the first time in their conversation he smiled, wry and unbothered. Not we. We're apothecaries of varying rank, sister. This is a matter for those above us. She inhaled slowly. He was right, of course. She was granting them a weight they did not carry, but it was hard not to, after what they'd both seen. Switching tack, she turned to a related datapad. The Mechanicus Alpha aboard the Diligent Herald. She was immune like the others, but she still turned. She became possessed, Nathaniel made a wincing face. According to the report from Gastward Cuthelm, our librarian, she was a seer before she joined the Mechanicus. Psychic, untrained, most likely turned through possession, either by sheer warp proximity or— He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. She may have been protecting her unborn child. Elisabetta arched a brow. What a marvelous job she did, she said dryly, spawning a demon drake by all accounts, although I must say I remain unconvinced there was a drake. She pulled another report from the pile. Captain Hordrick of the Watterazrath saw nothing. Auspex Adept Volks noted a fast-moving contact in the Geofon array, but suggested it may have been a Dark Eldar interceptor. I intend to cite that version in my formal report. If I claim they fired on a dragon, the Ordo Analysia will have me sectioned. Nathaniel laughed aloud, the sound echoing oddly in the sterile chamber. I tend to agree with you. Brother Osric himself seems to slay monstrous beasts on a regular basis, yet somehow no one else ever sees them. Elisabetta's lips curled into something between a smile and a frown. And yet, she said quietly, these people possess something that could one day be seen as a threat to the Imperium. The seers you mentioned. The warp shadow clinging to their bloodlines, the Susan membrane encoded into their genes as if by design, and now immunity to an unknown infection, one that defies all categorization. She let the datapad fall flat against the desk, the echo loud in the sterile room. That can only mean one thing. When I submit my report, I fear your newly founded chapter will be deemed too dangerous. Nathaniel turned his head slowly toward her, and there may be an overzealous response. Neither of them spoke after that. They both knew what might follow. If the Inquisition, especially the Ordo Malleus, or the High Lords themselves deemed the risk significant, then exterminatus was not just possible, it was probable. For Nathaniel, the thought no longer filled him with dread. He had been suppressing it for hours now, perhaps days. He was, after all, the official chief apothecary of the Void Revenants. It was his duty to report such findings. He should have already told Wulfgar, but Wulfgar was blinded by loyalty to the people of NihtWyrtha, to the myth of their strength and purity. He would not understand. Nathaniel, however, felt his conscience clear. If the Administratum judged this world to be a liability, then so be it. That was the price of duty. Even so, he was withholding something from Elisabetta. A detail. A small, gnawing thing. It did not seem relevant to her task. Not yet. And perhaps in the end it would not matter. Elisabetta rose abruptly. Her boots struck the tiles with a sharp click, each step measured. Her hands folded neatly behind her back. The golden aquila on her carapace caught the lumen glow, burning faint gold in the dim. We are both mere vessels of the Imperium, she said evenly. We do our duty with diligence. Nathaniel did not respond at first. He turned away again, his eyes drifting to the viewport. Below, or rather above, given the moon's slow arc in orbit, lay NihtWyrtha. The storm-swept oceans were half hidden beneath cloud banks, glimmering faintly in the reflected light of the system's distant sun. His own reflection stared back from the glass, black-clad, somber, unchanged. His warplate still bore the symbols of the Iron Hands. He had never removed them, and perhaps now he never would. This world, he murmured, is full of mysteries. A pause. Some better left alone. Perhaps, he thought bitterly, he need not face the problem at all. Once Sister Chirurgeon Elisabetta submitted her report, and the Ordos cast their judgment, it might all be taken out of his hands. It would be easier that way. He leaned forward on the edge of the Medicae platform, staring into the sterile glow of the quarantine ward's lumen strips. His fingers flexed at his side. The servo joint in his wrist hissed again. Always the reminder. He did not know who to trust. Wulfgar seemed oblivious, lost in myth and honor, unable or unwilling to see the shadows encircling their chapter. Osric, for all his talent, was a fool, blustering, arrogant, and half-mad on whatever vision of the past he'd woven for himself. Elfstan had only just arrived and was still grasping the scale of what lay before them. He had tried, truly tried, to warn Elfric. But he was no longer sure if the librarian had understood. Elfric saw threads in the warp, but sometimes failed to grasp the ones right in front of him. Nathaniel exhaled. Perhaps none of it mattered. A hiss of hydraulics and a dull thud broke the quiet as the security hatch slid open. Archmagos Demaya Veratrix stepped through, her crimson robes billowing behind her like a liquid curtain of blood. She inclined her head in greeting, the motion graceful yet mechanical, and clasped her hands together in that theatrical, calculating manner she always favored. "I was listening on the Vox. I do hope you don't mind," she said smoothly, her voice lilting like a choir synth. "So the contagion is contained? The subjects cleared for release?" Sister Chirurgeon Elisabetta turned sharply, ivory plate catching the dim light of the lumen strips. "The orders hospitaller are not to be monitored," she said, her tone flat and cold, though it carried an unmistakable edge of warning. Voratrix tilted her head, her expression one of exaggerated innocence. "My dear Sister Chirurgeon, I am the Archmagos of this world. It is my sacred duty to ensure its security. If you had fallen ill here, surely you would expect me to act in the planet's defense?" Elisabetta regarded her coolly. Gold-plated lips, artificial charm. Everything about the Archmagos was a facade, from her heeled boots on legs that were not legs, to the spider-like mechadendrites that poised like vipers behind her back. Even her crimson wig, exquisitely woven in mimicry of real hair, did little to hide the artifice beneath. Elisabetta was no fool. She saw through the Magos immediately. "Of course," she lied, her voice like glass. "I would expect nothing less." Voratrix offered a practiced smile, an imitation of warmth, nothing more. "The Mechanicus is always here to serve the orders hospitaller," she said, inclining her head in a theatrical bow. Nathaniel had watched the exchange in silence, quietly amused, but aware of the tightening tension. Before it escalated further, he stepped in. "Lady Voratrix acted on my advice," he interjected. "Mostly true. The Vox Matrix in the lab was operated by servitor banks under his purview. He had suggested a backup listening protocol in the event of a communication breakdown. With the Trevona strain involved, he had no interest in taking chances." Elisabetta's gaze flicked to him, then back to the Archmagos. She chose not to argue the point. "Very well," she said coolly. "I have what I need. My report is complete. Give my regards to the patient." Voratrix's expression didn't shift. "I heard you're bound for Grimness before returning to Terra." Her tone remained light, but the way her arms folded across her chest betrayed the calculation beneath. "I have spoken with Archmagos Senserax Centauri. She reports no new outbreaks. It's been over a month." Elisabetta adjusted the scroll case at her side. "Then it will be a brief investigation. The Adeptus biologist requires full reports." She paused, just slightly. "On all matters." Nathaniel twisted at his wrist again, the servo clicking softly over the ambient hymnals. He did not meet her eyes. Voratrix ignored the gesture, her lips curled faintly. "I'm sure Senserax Centauri will offer any aid you require." She shifted slightly, something in her mechanical gait adjusting weight. "However, since you're traveling that way, may I ask a favor?" Elisabetta narrowed her gaze. "What favor?" Nathaniel glanced at the Archmagos. That was unlike her. Voratrix did not ask for favors, not from the Ministorum. Voratrix exhaled softly, with what seemed genuine reluctance. Oceanus Orbi Sector M35.281A. The Navis Astra Wigathine have a remote outpost in the asteroid field there. They've reported signs of an outbreak. Their apothecary believes it to be rust fever. After the incident at Incoloris, I'd prefer confirmation, if only to put minds at ease. Elisabetta's expression barely changed, but her thoughts were already turning. She knew rust fever, a common affliction among isolated Mechanicus and Voidsman crews, especially those confined in close quarters for years. Victims became delirious, their flesh softening and rotting beneath the skin. Worse, they often began speaking in Binharic despite having no augmetics. Some would chant liturgies to the Omnissiah in dead synchronization, their vocal cords raw and bleeding, harmless to the mechanically augmented, but deadly to the unaugmented. The disease left behind something akin to cybernetic necrosis. She remembered the Secutor reliquary above Incoloris, a disaster narrowly averted, an entire freighter of madmen repeating synthetic mantras into the void. Had that not occurred, she would already be on Grimness, with the Pax Interas in orbit. Most unfortunate. Elisabetta studied Voratrix again. For once there was no deception, no game. She was genuinely asking for help. "I will divert the Pax Interas there on the way to Grimness," Elisabetta replied. "A delay of a few weeks will not disrupt the report. The Ministorum moves at Honey's pace." Voratrix gave a soft, unreadable hum of agreement, then simply said, Excellent. Sister Chirurgeon Elisabetta gave a low, deliberate bow, careful, formal, respectful, to Archmagos Demia Voratrix. Then she glanced over her shoulder toward Brother Nathaniel, offering a short, silent nod. He returned it with a single stiff motion. Without another word, Elisabetta stepped through the heavy-duty biosealed doors. No alarms sounded. No hydraulic locks hissed closed behind her. There was no longer any need. The Fraterus Templars on guard snapped to attention as she passed. With a synchronized stamp of boots and the mechanical clatter of weapons, they fell into formation and marched after her with the precision of oath-bound fanatics. Voratrix remained still. Her augmetic eyes, flickering with soft green light, watched the retreating figures. The artificial iris lenses narrowed slightly in silent calculation. Then, without expression, she sent a tight-beam data cant to the shuttle bay servitors, instructing them to prepare for the Order's Hospitaler's departure. No interference, no delays. She turned from the corridor, walking deeper into the sanctum's dim interior, mechadendrites trailing like the legs of a silent insect. Her boots clicked softly against the metal floor until she came to rest before the wide, curved windows that framed the lunar landscape beyond. Outside, Nithelm's pale surface stretched into stillness. Above it, immense and looming, hung NihtWyrtha, its dark oceans veiled by cloud banks and shifting weather patterns. But Voratrix's gaze was elsewhere, higher. There, like a blade of silver light cutting through the void, drifted the Pax Interis, the Order's Hospitaler's battle barge. In the official registries, it was listed as a heavy cruiser. But Voratrix knew better. It was a weapon of doctrine and mercy forged together, part freighter, part warship, a vessel built not merely for care, but for enforcement. In truth, it was closer in design and function to an Astartes battle barge than any ecclesiarchal hospital vessel. These were dangerous times. The lines between mercy and firepower were blurring. She was glad to see them go. And yet, if Elisabetta did deliver her report to Terra, if she named NihtWyrtha as a genetic anomaly, or worse, a danger, then the Pax Interis might return with different intent. Voratrix was under no illusions. That ship could carve a path through any orbital defense in the region. And if the Ordo Malleus ever took command of it, there would be no warning, no negotiation. But that was the future's concern. For now, the errant message, the one that may or may not find its way to the desks of power, was in the hands of fate, and data fate, she had learned, was anything but predictable. Behind her, Brother Nathaniel finished stacking the remaining parchments. He gave a silent gesture to the servitors, who began collecting the samples in their steel-clawed hands with ritual efficiency. Nathaniel glanced across the chamber at Voratrix, still watching the void. He took a long, slow breath. The silence between them deepened. Demia Voratrix spoke before Nathaniel could. A soft smile curled on her perfectly painted lips. "Brother Apothecary, you performed your duty with diligence and honor." Nathaniel hesitated. Her words caught him off guard. He instinctively flexed the servos in his wrist augmetic, which hissed and clicked under strain. "Archmagos, I assumed you would be." He paused, searching for the right word. "Disappointed. I understand how much time and dedication you've invested in this world, in the project, and the report." He trailed off, uncertain. Voratrix plucked the top parchment from a servitor as it passed. She glanced over its contents with disinterest. "Una, please, Nathaniel," she said smoothly. "We've known each other for most of that time, and it is my duty, as set by Mars, to forge an Astartes chapter born from your lineage. If the powers on Terra decide to alter that purpose..." She discarded the parchment with a flick of her fingers. "Then I must fulfill my obligation in another way. Time wasted is experience gained." She turned toward him, expression neutral. "I would like a short list of other worlds in the region, in case we need to relocate in haste." Nathaniel blinked. He had known how much she'd invested in the founding of the Void Revenants. This project had begun her career, and for a time defined it. But now, watching her move with unflinching resolve, he saw something else. He had been wrong about her. All the posturing, the carefully curated grace and affectations, these were just a mask. Beneath it, she was bound to Mars, loyal, honorable, in a way he had not truly understood. His respect for her deepened unexpectedly. "Arch," he stopped himself. "Lady Una, my apologies. I assumed I should not have." He twisted his wrist augmetic again, a nervous tick, the gears squealing faintly. I only have a short list. Sarathar has vast hive cities, some quite lawless. That could be an option. Incaloris is another. A few of its frontier colonies lie within the Arcana Inclusium. Rough planets, but viable. There's another world, too. It came up on our original deep scans, not in the Inclusium. KX Red 218, the locals call it Carvansari. Another lost colony world. Techno-barbarians, much like this one once. Voratrix nodded, intrigued. Yes, I remember the Incaloris cluster. Mostly stripped mining colonies. She tapped her temple lightly as her eyes unfocused. I'm not so sure about Sarathar. The local governors might be problematic. And Star's End, yes. I believe Remek Zaran visited that world. Not much use for his purposes, she added softly, almost distantly. She drifted to the sample bays, her augmetic eyes flaring with green glow as they scanned each vial, each container of preserved genetic data. But, she continued, I'll expect a full analysis on each. Yes, Lady Yuna, Nathaniel said, trying to stand straighter. His wrist squeaked again as he clenched it too tightly. Then she spoke again without turning. I would like to know, she said lightly, why you lied to the Sister Cherugian. Nathaniel froze. Lied, lady? I am many things, she said, still scanning the sample racks, but I am not unaware. You never told me what you found in your tests on the zygotes of the neophytes. Nathaniel swallowed. His throat felt dry. I've never withheld truth from the Order's Hospitaller, he said carefully. She turned now slowly, eyes glowing faintly behind artificial irises. But you withheld it from me. Nathaniel's voice faltered. How do you know about? He swallowed, eyes widening slightly. About the tests? Voratrix grinned, letting out a soft, mechanical chuckle. Oh, Nathaniel, I bugged your servitors. You really should purge their memory cores from time to time. You never know who might be listening. Nathaniel's hand trembled slightly. That's against Mechanicus protocol and chapter law, he said, his voice rising. She cut him off with a dismissive wave. Oh, Nathaniel, don't be a fool. The duty of founding a chapter is the most sacred oath an archmagos can undertake. Nothing can be overlooked. No errors can be tolerated. Nathaniel slumped into the nearest chair. It creaked beneath the weight of his warplate, despite being reinforced for an Astartes. I'm sorry, lady. Of course. Forgive me. He twisted his wrist augmetic again, realigning a miscalibrated tension coil he'd damaged earlier in frustration. I didn't speak of it because it's a chapter matter, not something the Order's Hospitaller need concern themselves with. Voratrix gave a slow, measured nod and turned to the viewport. Outside, the Hospitaller shuttle was lifting off from the landing pad, its bright exhaust plumes trailing into the moon's thin atmosphere. I thought as much, she said, but I didn't want to intrude. As you said, it's a chapter matter, and likewise not my concern. She paused, licking her gold-painted lips with a vat-grown tongue. Still, once the Sister Chirurgeon delivers her report, it may not need to be reported at all. Her glowing green eyes tracked the shuttle's slow ascent. The Pax Inter is hung high above, stark and silent, a weapon of faith and mercy both. Nathaniel twisted his wrist again, more forcefully. I suppose I should report it to Mentis. He'd need to know. But as you said, beyond that it's a matter of bookkeeping, Voratrix finished, flashing another of her practiced smiles. She gave a short bow. We are in the grace of the Omnissiah, Brother Nathaniel, until such time as we are not. In the meantime, we continue. Shall I inform Wulfgar? Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. No, when the time comes, I think I should be the one. Voratrix nodded slowly. If the time comes, Nathaniel, if is such a beautifully open-ended possibility. She turned and began walking toward the isolation ward, mechadendrites coiling behind her like the tail of a serpent. Nathaniel allowed himself a rare smile, then frowned. A thought had just struck him. Lady Yuna! She stopped and turned, smiling expectantly. Nathaniel? He twisted his wrist tightly, voice carefully level. Carvansari! I never said it was called Star's End. Voratrix held her smile. For a moment she stood perfectly still, unnaturally so. Then her lips curved again. I must have auto-translated it, she said with a light laugh. My audio cogitators do that sometimes. Nathaniel nodded slowly, but his frown deepened. Uralkin isn't in the Lexicon Librarius either, he said. I checked, years ago. Voratrix maintained her smile. It's within Incaloris space. My good friend, Archmagos Pyrovox, provided me with an extended lexicon. I must have filed it at some point. She nodded politely, then with a swish of crimson robes, turned and left, sealing the hatch behind her. For a moment, she stood alone in the corridor, her expression blank. One cheek twitched with an errant thought. Then she extended a mechadendrite and jacked it into the wall-mounted data link. It took only a few seconds to locate the correct servitor and dispatch an overwrite. Just in case, she told herself. After all, she had a duty, if only to herself. She unplugged, straightened her robes, and walked on toward the isolation pods, smile returning. She had to see Bjornwolf, let him know he was free to leave without infection thanks to his ancestry, and of Wolfgar's decision to accept him as a neophyte into the Void Revenants. Inside, Nathaniel sat alone, ignoring the clatter of servitor movement. He could still hear her voice in his mind. My good friend, Pyrovox. She had never called Pyrovox a friend, let alone a good one. And in Caloris, he had scrubbed every archive. Uralkin had never appeared in any lexicon, ever. He twisted his augmetic wrist again until the metal groaned. Then, without hesitation, he stood. He had decided. He would speak to Chaplain Wolfgar, and he would do so immediately. Finish the cataloging, he ordered the servitors, then report to recharge for memory purging. As they obeyed, he turned sharply on his heel and strode out of the medical bay, his footsteps ringing with purpose. Brother Apothecary Nathaniel strode through the station's vaulted causeways with grim determination, the heavy footfalls of his power-armored boots echoing sharply off steel and stone. He ignored the salutes of the new batch of chapter serfs, fresh initiates in simple gray robes adorned with the sigil of the Void Revenants. Their eyes followed him with reverence, or perhaps fear, but he gave them no glance. There was no time for ceremony. He passed beneath a hulking loading servitor, its massive limbs holding a pressurized spray unit. The mechanical beast hissed softly as it painted long arcs of stormy blue across the fuselage of a waiting Thunderhawk. Sigils were carefully stenciled by secondary arms. Chapter iconography newly adapted from NihtWyrtha's heritage, a white skull haloed by flickering spectral flame. Nathaniel ducked low beneath one of the servitor's swinging limbs, the scent of fresh ceramite coat lingering like ozone in the air. The docking bay was alive with movement. Serfs, drones, cargo cranes, but he focused on a single vessel. It stood out starkly against the sea of freshly painted transports. A Thunderhawk still clad in matte black, no blue, no flames, no oaths to Wirthan soil. The hull bore the iron sigil of the Apothecarium Farishae, his personal seal from before the founding. It was the only ship in the bay that still bore the livery of the Iron Hands. As he approached, a chapter serf in repurposed Iron Hands pattern armor stepped to attention at the base of the gangway. "Where do you wish to go, Lord?" the serf asked respectfully, voice filtered through a Vox grill. Nathaniel shook his head. "I will fly myself." He paused, eyes scanning the Thunderhawk for any sign of disrepair. There was none. "But," he added, "you can go up to command. Request landing clearance for Nitward Hall." He twisted his wrist, the servo joints grinding softly. "Tell Chaplain Wolfgar to expect me." The serf bowed low without question and turned to carry out the order. Nathaniel stepped forward just as a servitor finished descending the gangway, its task complete. The creature's blank eyes flickered as it passed, dragging a spool of data cable behind it. Without hesitation, Nathaniel stepped aboard. The ramp began to rise behind him, servos whining shut. The hatch sealed with a final clunk, cutting him off from the noise and color of the new chapter outside. Within the silence of the old Thunderhawk, clad in black and iron, Nathaniel allowed himself a moment to breathe. Then he moved to the cockpit. There was a storm coming, and it was time someone told Wolfgar. The shuttle roared as it tore upward through Nithelm's thin, dusty atmosphere. Brother Apothecary Nathaniel gripped the flight controls with precise, practiced movements. The ancient Thunderhawk, still clad in the black livery of the Iron Hands, groaned under its own weight, its retrofitted systems lagging just a fraction behind every command. As the horizon tilted, the storm-lit curve of NihtWyrtha filled the viewport, veiled in cloud and shadow. Below, the spined ridgelines of the Weirdfen Mountains rose like the ribs of some buried beast. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. He had not felt fear in decades. Not since the battle that led to his exile, his reassignment, his quiet removal from Medusa. And yet it gripped him now, not for himself, not even for the world below, but for what he had missed. A lumen flickered on the control panel, then another, yellow to orange, then a dull red. Thruster control, primary feedback loop failure. He tapped at the reroute switch. Nothing. Auxiliary ignition stuttered once, then died. The flight servos hissed, and the entire cockpit shuddered as gravity reasserted its claim. No, he muttered, already keying alternate vectoring protocols. Nothing responded. The shuttle tilted into a steep roll. Nathaniel fought the inertia, locking one boot under the console brace as he pulled the manual override. Alarm klaxons screamed to life. A dozen red lumens bloomed across the panels, casting his face in strobing crimson. The mountain peaks surged into view below, rising far too fast. He reached for the Vox. This is Brother Apothecary Nathaniel, Shuttle Faraday Primus experiencing uncontrolled descent. Engaging emergency beacon now. He slammed the panel. A shrieking tone echoed through the cabin as the distress signal activated. In the Geofon command center, Osric's voice crackled through the comms. Shuttle Primus, you are losing altitude. Eject now. That's an order, Nathaniel. Get out of there. Nathaniel reached for the ejector bar. The old iron hands design, manual and redundant, just in case. His hand closed around the grip, and his wrist locked. The augmetic servo, a replacement he'd fidgeted with for years, twisting and readjusting under stress, gave one final tremor. Then it split with a sharp metallic crack. Wires burst from the casing. Coolant hissed. His fingers refused to close. The bar would not budge. He stared at the ruined augmetic, then at the control panel. And then, for a moment, he smiled. She knew, he whispered. The mountain range consumed the viewport. The Thunderhawk hit the peaks a heartbeat later. There was no flame, no explosion, just a sickening impact, metal screaming against stone, the signal flare rising into the sky long after the ship's hull was torn apart on the ridgeline of NihtWyrtha's ancient bones.